And thanks everyone for being here. Whether this is your first time or you are a regular, it adds so much to the class to have all of your unique voices and perspectives. So there's no, I enjoy nothing more than learning experience and time with you guys. Thank you. And if you're joining us on Zoom as well, welcome, welcome. I'm going to screen share the source sheet so you have it. It's a lot of reading today. We'll get through it. It's going to be good. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the class yet, what we're studying in this course is Midrashim. There are two kinds, Midrash Halakha and Midrash Agada. Midrash Halakha is more focused on law, with law, what can be derived by creative, looking at text creatively. But then Midrash Agada is more narrative in structure. So we're really going on stories. And I've picked for this course the Midrashim that speak to me most, that have something that contains insight onto how best to live life. So I think these are the narrative Midrashim that have most impacted me, that I hope to share with you and deepen my relationship to them through your insights, as I hope you're deepening your relationship to Midrash through the class. Today's topic, we all know, it goes without saying, that there's just been so much hate in our lives recently. Not that it's new, but it's feeling extra painful and extra severe as of late. And so what I wanted to do for us was to give us a topic on a session on love. I want to go the other way, and I want to we need a little shelter from the storm. So today is stories loved by. I want a brief preface. Well, if you go down one, sorry. There are obviously so many different ways to love. Our first text is going with marital love and sort of that manifestation of love. But from there, we're going to extrapolate into different kinds of love as well, ultimately just arcing towards relationships. So I don't want anyone to feel like this is too specific on a particular kind of love. Really, what we're addressing here is love in all of its forms, and particularly relationship in general. So the first text, also just one more way of introduction is we're in Bereshit now. So I thought it's only appropriate to bring some Bereshit Rabbah Midrash on the creation of the world. We just read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and what happened on each day. And this Midrash, as its jumping off place, is, well, we know what God did in the first 6 days, 7 days after God rested too. But what's God done for us lately? Right? That's basically the question is, what did God do after those 7 days? So who wants to jump in? We'll go in the English. Well, everyone's eating. Any great volunteers? Okay, please. Yes, thank you.
Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon began. God settles the individuals in a home.
But this is from Psalms. I'll just say it in the Hebrew. So Elohim, Moshiv, Yechidim, Baita. Yechidim, so Yechid is alone, or a single entity. Single. Right, single. And Baita, home. So there's
the house.
In that, right, exactly. So it's sort of going off of that. Single one in a house.
A noble woman asked Rabbi Yossi ben Halafta, in how many days did the Holy Blessed One create the world? He said to her, in 6 days, as it is written, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. She said to him, from that time until now, what has God been doing? He said to her, God is sitting in matchmaking. He said to him, that is God's vocation. I too can do so. I have several slaves and I have several maidservants, and I can make matches between them in a single moment. He said to her, if it appears simple in your eyes before the Holy Blessed One, it is as difficult as the parting of the Red Sea. Rabbi Yossi ben Halafta went on his way. What did she do? She took 1,000 slaves and 1,000 maidservants and stood them in several lines. She said, so-and-so shall marry so-and-so, and so-and-so shall marry so-and-so. She made matches between them in one night. Next day they came to her. This one, his head was wounded. This one, his eye was gouged. This one, his leg was broken. He asked him, what do you want? This one said, I do not want that one. That one said, I do not want this one. Immediately she sent and brought Rabbi Yossi ben Halafta. She said to him, there is no God like your God. Your Torah is true. It is fine and praiseworthy. You spoke well. He said to her, is that not what I said to you? If it appears simple in your eyes before the Holy Blessed One, it is as difficult as the parting of the Red Sea. What does the Holy Blessed One do for them? God matches them against their will, not to their liking, as he stated. God settles the individuals in a home. God liberates prisoners in chains.
Hebrew, bakosharot.
What is bakosharot? It is with weeping
Bechi,
and with song.
the shirot.
One who is willing with song, and one who is unwilling weeps.
Okay, let's pause for a second here, because at first it felt pretty self-explanatory, and it gets a little more complicated, but first let's react to this initial concept. What has God been doing since creation of the world? Ever since? God is matchmaking. That is how God occupies God's time. What are some initial reactions on that? Do you think that's an interesting answer? Do you like that answer? Do you push back?
Then how come there are wars in Holocaust?
Sure, maybe.
Yeah, that would be a case of saying there really is free will. He doesn't have to do this.
Wait, say more about that last part.
In other words, he doesn't have to worry about the wars and the health.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So you're saying that explains,
Off.
got it.
He's hands off on the workings of the world.
Got it. So I think you're saying God is so occupied with making matches that everything else is kind of free for all because God is busy. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay.
I look at it a totally different way. That he continues creating. He's continued creating. I mean, there's I don't know. It's called evolution.
Okay, good.
In a way, it's evolution, but I'm thinking of, I mean, the grass grows.
And that,
He's creating grass. I mean, it didn't just come out of the seed because there's a seed there.
Good. So the idea that creation is continuously unfolding, it wasn't just one moment.
But
That's
I've
over.
often pretended to stop on Shabbat either. Some of this stuff continues.
Right. Good. And we can get into some Rashi that talk about that.
I have
See,
a
but-
question about Matrona.
Okay.
Is it a Roman woman? Because she says to him, your God.
Good. Love it. So you could, so the Hebrew for the woman that approaches the rabbi is matrona, which you could see, where's the linguistical, the matron, right? Matron. But there's a whole style in Talmud of, Roman or, not Greek, or basically a non-Jew, like a sort of this polemic, like a epicurist, somebody who's going to challenge Judaism comes to a rabbi and says, if you're so great, if your religion, if your God is so great, then how come this? And then the rabbi will best them in a battle of wits kind of thing. So yes, I think it's a very astute assumption to make that this may be a Roman, what's the word, like a socialite, what's the word? Noble woman, yeah, noble woman. Thank you. Yeah.
No, I think to me what it says is the importance of making Jewish homes. Because obviously he's creating a Jewish home. And so that tells us something about the importance of it, because God otherwise wouldn't be into it.
Right. So maybe it's not at the expense of all other work. Like maybe God is doing a lot of other things also, but it speaks to the priority on God's list, which is interesting because at first, the first creature, the first human being is created alone, right? Whether you go with, there are different ways to look at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, right? Whether the first creature, Adam, was some kind of combination of Adam and Eve, and God separated them so they could see each other as two separate entities, but they were originally one, or with Genesis 2, where it really is much more explicit that the man is created first and alone, and then God creates out of that man Eve, the woman, right? So there are two separate accounts, and we can have a whole session on, and actually, we're gonna end with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs
Not that.
putting 1 and 2 and Francis perked up. The British pride there, yeah, but how he put Genesis 1 and 2 in conversation with each other, so we will circle back to that. But right, the idea but so it's interesting, right? That aspect of creation, which kind of only came after God saw that Adam was alone, is now what God is prioritizing ever since. Matchmaking, putting human beings together, right? Which was sort of like an afterthought in the
But
first
for what
place.
purpose?
To create a home, right,
But he's also making it says that that's important.
yes,
Having children is, making matches. is
Right.
important.
right. And I just want, in the Sheva Brachot, or in a traditional Jewish wedding, the end of the wedding, there are Sheva Brachot, 7 blessings. And there are celestial motifs that go through, right? The first is Adam and Eve, right? That this is, a marriage is a creation, right? When you're building a home together, you are creating a life together. So it transports under the chuppah, the two people getting married back to Gan Eden, back to the Garden of Eden, in this connection as you're now creating. So it's interesting that God continues in that way through pairing people off to do the work that God did in the Garden of Eden by creating, renewing creation through building Jewish homes and families. Okay, great. And then the other aspect here is that the matrona, right? The noble woman is saying, well, it's easy, right? That God is, it takes God. God is doing that. I could do that, right? And so what's interesting about pairing it with, you could choose anything. They're choosing here the Red Sea, right? That it is as difficult for God as splitting the Red Sea. You think it's easy? It was as difficult as that. What is gained midrashically through invoking the Red Sea when talking about the difficulty of finding matches? What are some ideas? There's no right answer, just, yeah. Or do you see any, like, in the text, what literally is happening? Yeah.
Well, I was just reading this book, the Tzvi Herzchayas, on the Talmud, and he makes the point that Midrash was really, they would invoke biblical examples as, because these people didn't have books, so they were also trying to teach
Sure.
Bible at the same time by invoking Red Sea. He's reminding them, and if you don't know what Red Sea is, look it up on the computer.
I like that, sure. So maybe it's a pedagogical tool,
Yeah.
but also Midrash is all about putting text relationship in conversation with text. So Asa, yeah, and then David and
I guess the way that I look at it is, I don't think it was difficult for God to part the Red Sea. I think that it was based on a human's interaction with God that caused the parting of the Red Sea. So I think when it comes to him matchmaking, it would depend on how people are, like, how people are communicating with each other, but then also with God.
so say more about that partnership between human beings and God in parting the Red Sea. Are you referring to a specific story, or what makes you say that?
Well, so like when, like, God could part the Red Sea whenever God wanted to. But it was an act of, like, one person.
Who?
That's a really good question.
No. Who do you have in mind when you say it? Not testing you.
Moses.
Okay, good. So
Okay.
so you're the perfect segue into a point I wanted to make. So I was going to say this is Asa's first contribution to this class, and it was a home run. So I just want to. But the segue I was thinking is not Moses, but Nachshon, right? So there's another midrash that you may all be familiar with or not, but it's there. So the Israelites arrive at the lip of the Red Sea, and they're between literally a rock and a hard place, right? There's the Red Sea here, the Sea of Reeds, and there's the Egyptian army rushing them from behind, right? So they're drowning this way, death on this way, and so there are 3 different reactions that the Israelites make. The people, they do what?
Give up.
Complain, give up, cry, right? We're very good at doing all that, right? So there's that. Then Moses does what?
Cries out to God.
Call out to God,
Who
right?
said, why are you crying out? Get it to me already.
Right. So Moses does something better than what the Israelites do. Moses doesn't complain, Moses doesn't, but Moses prays. And yet, that's still not the best reaction, because God says, what are you doing praying to me for? Go. Who is the one who goes?
Not so.
Nachshon. So there's a Midrash that Nachshon, that Aminadab doesn't complain, doesn't even pray in that moment, or at least not verbally, but maybe physical prayer. Nachshon jumps into the sea of reed up into his nose as an act of faith, literally a leap of faith. So the point that Asa is making is that maybe, it's not so hard for God, first of all, because for us, it would be impossible to split the sea, but for God, nothing is hard, nothing too hard, nothing too possible, maybe, but also the idea that there's partnership, right? That it isn't just God going bing, 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 you go here, but it takes human participation, partnership with God and a leap of faith, right? Right. Often when we're talking about building a Jewish home, when talking about a romantic love or marriage, there requires a leap of faith like Nachshon takes. So it isn't just waiting on our laurels for God to make those matches. It also requires partnership with God, relationship, and a leap of faith. So not just relationship between people, but also between God and David and Jerry. Yeah.
I think there's another interesting thing about this is, as I agree with you, that if God wants to part the Reed Sea, the Red Sea, whichever sea, not a problem.
Right.
But it's from the perspective of the person asking the question that it's a problem. So when he cites that, in a sense, he's saying, it's hard for you to part the Red Sea.
Mhm. Right. So when you said from the perspective of the person asking the question, say more about that? What do you mean?
So I mean, from the perspective of, I think, as you said, a lot of these stories, particularly if they involve somebody Roman or somebody Persian, depending on whether we're in Eretz Israel or in Babel.
Right.
In a sense, that's almost belittling them. The words that are put into their mouth, at least from our perspective, seem silly.
Right.
So in a sense, it's building, the rabbis are building themselves up against somebody who theoretically asked such a silly question.
Yeah.
So it's whether that's a literary construct or just the homiletical point or both. I think it still works the same way. It's the perspective of the Persian or Roman is bass backwards, so to speak. I'm going to tell you it's hard to split the Red Sea because from your point of view, it's hard to split the Red Sea. From our point of view, God wants to split the Red Sea.
Got it.
God splits the Red Sea.
So you're saying it's just putting it in terms that they can.
Also, I guess it relates back to the idea of what a people's understanding of a God would be. Because the ancients anyway had this idea that the reason people are here at all is to feed the gods or entertain the gods or play one god off against another. It's not even merely anthropomorphism. It's if you read Greek mythology, they're frequently interacting with gods who seem to be just like humans, except superpowered.
Yeah.
We don't have that kind of conception of God. So that's already different.
I like that. So you're seeing in here a Judaism declaring itself as a different relationship with God, which goes back to our main theme of relationship, right? That like, this may not make sense to you because you have a different conception of what human beings' relationship with God is. But for us, there is this loving relationship that God wants to. It's not what we can do for God all the time and how we can please or entertain or sacrifice to the gods. It's how God actually is helping us and wanting us to build homes together in love. That's great. Yes.
So for me, the reference to the Red Sea takes a different meaning. It refers us back to the Jews' experience in Egypt. And in Egypt, there were many situations where men and women as couples had to make very difficult decisions about the firstborn, et cetera, et cetera. So they made the right decisions, we now know, but that was because they had a Jewish home.
Okay, great. And I think to support your point, we also were getting slaves here, right? She has these slaves. So I think that does take us back to Egypt. So whether you look at marriage as slavery or as redemption, either way. What day? Yeah, exactly.
But about the Red Sea was, so referring to the Red Sea, I wasn't thinking of just the Red Sea, I was thinking about everything that led up to it. Getting, pulling a nation out of another nation.
Right,
So I was thinking the whole
but
thing.
all of that is, right,
That
right.
all of that was part of what was meant by the Red Sea.
Yes, and I read it that way as well. There's just one more literary thing I want to draw our attention to, which is that how does the Matrona, how does she pair them off? Stand up, the choreography of it. How does she do it?
Oh, they line up in 2 rows
Which kind of looks like,
down the aisle.
which also kind of, good, walking down the aisle, I like, but what else does it look like?
Split sea.
Oh,
Right.
it's splitting in the what?
Okay, so she is literally trying to do what God does, right? She literally makes a sea of person, right? Puts in like 2 rows and it's trying to basically say, and that goes back, I think it was to David's point about what I can be God, right? And how Judaism is sort of challenging that notion that we can play God in something so miraculous as love, right? That it takes partnership, like Oscar was saying. But that we can't, it's so beyond us, we can't do it alone. But we also can't sit on our laurels and expect that to be for us, right? Okay, well, let's finish up. So then we got to something interesting and we got to a midrashic move, which is a word play I want us to talk about. So I think, we have to return to the context with which the rabbis wrote this, which is not all that love is. Right, let's go to Fiddler on the Roof, right? Will you love me? It's that's how we have. But right, that romantic love isn't the only thing that matters, right? It's more what are these families? Who are you? Like there's obligation, and it's much less just like who do you want to marry, and more who obligation, like who must you marry. So I think that's when it gets to this whole thing about it's not always willing, right? I think that's what it's referring to, that God makes these matches that are like fated or destined to be together, even if it isn't, but acknowledging that not everybody wants to be married or to that person, right? So that's what it's doing here when it says, going back to that verse of Psalms, right? Going to the Pticha, the opening verse from Psalm. If you look at the word for chains, and it translates in English, but bakosharot, right? There's a word play that's happening. Right. Good, like ties, binds from Kesher, right? Good. But here,
Okay.
Beko Sharot, if you were to put a line between Bako and Sharot, like the Bako, Bechi is to cry. And then Sharot sounds like same root word, same root letter. So Shirot is song. So it's saying basically whether it's the former, Bechi, whether they are matched up crying, meaning they don't want to, or Vishirot, happily singing up to they want to, right? So if you that and that is a like classic midrashic move, right? Okay, good. So now let's finish the final paragraph. You want to take it home?
Rabbi Barachia said, in this language, Rabbi Yossi ben Halafta answered her. The Holy Blessed One sits and crafts ladders and humbles this one and raises that one, lowers this one and elevates that one. As it says, but it is God who is the judge. God humbles this one and raises that one. There are instances where one goes to his match, and there are instances where one's match comes to him. Isaac, his match, came to him, as it is stated. Isaac went out walking in the field. Behold, he saw camels coming.
Which is Rebecca, right? So the idea there is that Rebecca came to Isaac. All you had to do was, this is going from the male's perspective here, and in these examples, saying here are 2 men for whom, in one case, with Isaac, his match came to him, and then in the other case,
Jacob went to his match, as it is written. Jacob departed from this.
right. So Jacob went. So that's the idea of the ladder. There's a couple interesting things there, sort of like raising one and humbling and elevating others. For me, when I first read that, I was thinking, oh, like personally, I married above my station, right? Like I personally feel it, right? In every way, right? Yeah. but I also think it's talking about just in terms of who is coming to whom. Like sometimes you have to go out and find them, other times you're just so blessed that they come to you. So let's pause for a second before we continue, just if anybody wants to chime in with how this text as a whole is hitting them, whether it resonates with their personal experience or doesn't, what insight this gives us about love. Again, you can talk about relationship in general, but obviously in this text case is talking more about marriage or romantic love. Yeah.
What about the idea that we were all there at Sinai?
Mhm.
There's a dating site that's
Saw
called
you at Sinai.
Met You at Sinai.
Yeah.
How does that fit into all this idea of matchmaking? Is there anything to do with the fact that they were all there at once?
Right, so Jerry's talking about this idea that every Jewish soul, the rabbinic idea that every Jewish soul, well, it comes straight from the text, because God is saying, not only with you am I making this covenant, but with those not here. Meaning that future generations of Jews, this covenantal moment transcends one moment in history, right? So there's this idea that every Jewish soul was present at Sinai, whether, Jews before us, Jews after us, and that generation itself. And so then the romantic notion here that a contemporary dating site played on, because Saw You at Sinai, I think it's an Orthodox dating app or website, says that, well, there's this besheretz, right? That God matches souls together. And so like Saw You at Sinai, meaning like this was destined God, moment where we were all present, like I saw you there, and that kind of a thing. So I think it is parallel. I don't think it conflicts with anything we've read here. I think the rabbis here genuinely believe that matches are made in heaven. That's not to say that they always succeed or that that every relationship is therefore perfect by all means, right? That's not the case. But I do think they are feeling like there is destined, the shared quality to that kind of a love from God. Yeah, David, and then she.
And that brings me to this idea of what are we actually talking about here? If we are talking about love here, I don't think it's what our modern concept of love might or might not be, and certainly it's not per se romantic.
Mhm.
It seems like what we're talking about is the matches themselves,
Right.
which this explicitly states are sometimes with tears and sometimes with song. But it's the matches themselves that seem to be important.
Right.
So that kind of circles back to the whole Fiddler on the Roof analogy you brought up, which is that even there, the song basically says their love is something that if it exists, developed over all those years of being together and having to solve problems together, and she cooked and slaved for him, and he did, he took the milk to everybody so there'd be something to pay for the food, et cetera, and so forth. Which is maybe implied in here, but it's a sort of different than we might ordinarily think this many years after this was written.
Right, so let's step that out for just a second, and I'll get to Sheila, but so you're right, I think love is kind of missing from here. But that's not to say that Judaism doesn't value love as a concept, right? For instance, the examples here, Jacob, who worked 7 years for Leah and then another 7 for Rachel, and it was as if a day in his eyes, right? So there's certainly examples of real romantic love.
Was
In
that
our-
love or
Hannah.
lost?
7 years, you gotta think of something more. But
Hannah and Sarah, they're
again,
Hannah is love.
yeah, oh yeah, right, absolutely. But I think to David's point, right, there is a difference between, and I know we in this class too, we've compared, or our conversation has gone to comparing religions a couple times, but Christianity versus Judaism, right? Like with Christianity, their love is sort of at the core, at least it should be, right? Like that's sort of, that's the brand, right? And anybody feel free, I don't mean to speak for Christianity, right? But love is really sort of and with Judaism, the brand that it gets or the reputation it gets is that less emphasis on love and more emphasis on mitzvot,
Compatibility.
obligations.
Compatible, well, not even that's not right.
Oh, yeah, not even in a relationship context, just in terms of like, if you had to boil down Christianity, I think a good Christian would tell you love, it's about love, right? And if you had to boil down.
Yeah, like
Judaism-
loving us to death, so to speak, but
Right.
this is where I think that kind of oversimplifies things and breaks things down too much.
I
Because after all,
Yeah.
isn't the Shema about love? Isn't
Of
that what
course.
we're supposed to do?
Push back at anyone who said that Judaism is not about love. But I think if you were to boil it down and if you had to oversimplify, but then again, if on one foot, love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Yeah.
That which is hateful to you.
Right.
So that's right, that's what Hillel says. Sorry,
Mitzvah kruvu, so it's all for
so it's sure,
getting more.
if the first mitzvah is be fruitful and multiply, then maybe love is at the core and center. Okay, so you guys have pushed back on me and I will. Is about love. Yeah. I think if you were to talk to others, they might say, and then I'm gonna get to Jackie, that, well, love is wonderful and love is fantastic and love is, but tradition, I'm going back to it's more about piyuv. It's more about obligation, mitzvot, masim tovim, good deeds. And if it's about love, well, it's about our relationship with God and how we're feeling mitzvot to partner with God. And I think that's how you get the Tevye song about do you love me? Because it's not as relevant in that mindset. It's more, are we fulfilling mitzvot? Are we building a Jewish home? Are we doing it? Love is sort of secondary because what's more important is mitzvot. I think, but that's not what I believe personally. I agree with you guys that love's that.
Well, given what I have done for many years and the many a text that I had to letters, everyone part of the text by hand. And you read what it says in the ketubot. It's a contract. There's not much about, coochie kind of love.
Right, right,
It's a very business-like arrangement.
right.
But it also has obligations stated in it. And the obligatory part of it is very strong and very structured. No matter which version you use, and I don't begin until I talk to the rabbi who's doing the performing of the marriage, because each one has a different idea of what they want the ketubah to be.
Right.
So, like days later.
Right, no, good, but that also speaks to, Talmudically, the rabbinic tradition, we're trying to create a legal system post.
Everything is
temple.
according to the laws of Moses and Israel.
Right, that Moshe Israel, and that is the priority is love. That doesn't mean it's at the expense of love. It just means that, look, we can't mandate love, but we can mandate systems and, obligations, and that's what the focus is. That doesn't mean that that's the top priority. It's just what the concern of the rabbis are in trying to build a legal halachic system.
I'm gonna say that we do try to command love. It's right there in the Ten Commandments. You're supposed to love God.
Right, and your father, right, yeah, I'll honor you.
Mother.
That's
But
odd.
right, love God, right, that is commanded,
Yeah,
right, good. That again makes speak to, right, the love being between God and people. So then, but then the romantic love is still where it's
yeah,
at.
but I want to also say that, we're not 100% about doing mitzvot,
Mhm.
because if I'm not mistaken, 365 of them are negatives. Don't do them.
Right, there's a lot of don't do them.
There's
Well,
more don't do them
yeah.
than do them.
Which is.
And nobody can do all of them anyway, because some of them you need to be in Israel, some of them you need a temple,
Correct.
Right.
et cetera.
No individual can do them all. But
Right.
The quality is for
Yeah.
Last comment, because I know we have more reading and,
Yes.
yeah.
There's a very interesting thing here. It says, there are instances where one goes to his match, and there are instances where one's match comes to him.
Mhm.
So it's like, the woman can pursue the man.
Oh, yeah, no question, right,
Is-
yeah, which you
yes.
make is radical for its time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, yeah, I love that, right. And our tradition also was a forerunner in acknowledging, like on the cutting edge of acknowledging things that other religious traditions in that regard, in terms of like women's right to intimacy, desire for intimacy, all those things that actually Judaism was really on the cutting edge in terms of acknowledging and mandating, so. Good point there.
The whole point about the ketubah, it's supposed to be, belong to the woman.
To protect the woman.
Right.
Protect.
You're right.
That is its initial function, is to to guarantee basic protection for the woman.
You give him the shirt off his back.
Yeah, exactly. Good, I want us to keep going. So I promised that we weren't gonna only talk about romantic love, so I want to keep going. So this is Genesis Rabbah, and again, staying in that God creation and Midrashim, coming from that story. So let's who wants to read this one, and I want to invite Zoom as well. So don't feel like you can't read because you're on Zoom. But anybody at all for the second one,
Oh, yeah.
please, Jerry, go for it.
Another interpretation. Why did God bless Shabbat?
Right, we know that it says that God blessed Shabbat, right? By Kadshehu, right? God blessed the Sabbath day. Okay, so why?
Rabbi Berachia and Rabbi Dostai and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, Rabbi Berachia and Rabbi Adasto say it is because it does not have a partner. Sunday as Monday, Tuesday as Wednesday, but Shabbat has no partner. Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachman said it is the blessing of Shabbat
So referring to the blessing of Shabbat
is in that it cannot be postponed. Festivals may be postponed, Yom Kippur may be postponed, but Shabbat cannot be postponed.
Okay, pause for 1 sec. So this is the machloket that we're getting, right? Rabbi, a debate, authentic argument. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman says, well, yeah, it's sad that Shabbat doesn't have a partner, but it can't be postponed. Shabbat, like you can postpone other holidays so that they can't be on Shabbat too, because, for instance, you can't fast on Shabbat, Shabbat's doing it, so Yom Kippur, right, it gets pushed aside. But Shabbat didn't get pushed
Yom
aside.
Kippur is the one that doesn't get pushed aside.
What?
Tisha B'Av gets
I'm
pushed
sorry,
aside.
Tisha B'Av, yes, thank you, yes. Right, you can have we just had Yom Kippur. on
Yeah,
Shabbat.
right.
Thank you, that's what I was saying. But Tisha B'Av, right, you would push that aside, good. But, what is this reminding you of another Midrash we did together, where someone is being appeased, but it's not.
The moon.
Good, right? Remember the Midrash about the moon where God says, well, you'll have this and this and this, and then it's not enough. So that's kind of what's happening here. So we have Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who's going to give a different opinion. Jerry, keep reading, if you don't mind.
Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai taught, Shabbat said before the Holy Blessed One, Master of the universe, all of them, the other days, have partners, but I do not have a partner. The Holy Blessed One said to it, the congregation of Israel is your partner. When Israel stood before Mount Sinai, the Holy Blessed One said to them, remember the matter that I said to Shabbat. The congregation of Israel is your partner. That is the meaning of the statement in the Ten Commandments. Remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy.
The Chorot Yom Shabbat Lekadsho. What is the midrashic move that links the Chorot Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho to the people of Israel being Shabbat's partner?
The Commandments.
Huh?
The Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments.
No, Kadesh.
Good. That was what I was looking for. So say more about it.
Kadesh.
Yeah.
It says it all.
Right. Good. Good. So,
Like Kiddushin?
Kiddushin. Yeah. So the traditional Jewish marriage is Kiddushin. Kadesh, there are a couple meanings in English. One, obviously, sanctify. And if you go back to Hekdesh in the sanctuary, Hekdesh was a category of grain, supplies, materials that were set aside for sacrificial offering, for temple worship. So similarly, like when you marry someone, you are setting them aside for this most holy purpose. So there's that. So there's Kedusha in the sense of separate and apart, but then there's Kedusha also just in the sense of holiness. The angels say Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 right? The marriage is or love, or relationship is this most holy institution. So that is the midrashic link. The Yom Shabbat Lekadsho, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. But they're saying, well, that is actually God telling the people of Israel that Shabbat is their Sabbath bride, right? We refer to Shabbat as the Shabbat Malka.
Boikala.
Right. Boikala, Lechadodi, right? So that in many ways is when we say Lechadodi, like we are enacting that moment of marrying, partnering up with the Sabbath. So even though it might use romantic marital love as a metaphor, this is speaking to a very different kind of love, which is the love between people of Israel and Shabbat, between us and God, between us and Judaism.
Pirkei Avot,
Say more.
where many people say Pirkei Avot, and Song of Songs are actually building on that idea.
Exactly. Right, so Jackie's mentioning Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, is so explicit and erotic that there's a question of how could it have made our sacred canon, our you know, like how, and the answer that what got it in to our like, you know, sacred collection of texts is that they read it allegorically. They said, well, it's not between two people, it's God and the people of Israel. You have to read it allegorically, and that's how it became one of our.
Rabbi, is this Shimon ben Yochai the same as Shimon bar Yochai?
That's a great question. Let me think for a second. I believe so.
If so, would a passage like this, if there are similar passages, if this is the kind of Midrash that's where Shimon bar Yochai says such things, maybe there's a pattern, in other words, maybe that would go to explain why the author of the Zohar had to make the book older by connecting it to Shimon bar Yochai.
I like that, but bringing him up makes a lot of sense here because Kabbalat Shabbat is a Kabbalistic mystical
Yeah,
tradition. So I think that's a really interesting link, and I think you may be spot on with that.
well, certainly Lecha Dodi is, we don't necessarily think of it that way unless we start looking behind it, but yeah.
Right, and that whole, I mean, the Zohar, there, it talks a lot about, it really leans into romantic love as a metaphor for our pursuit of Judaism, our pursuit of Torah, our pursuit of God. That there's like this, that the Torah sort of, again, and it gets erotic, it sort of flashes you with a moment of insight of like peering past the veil.
Well, even that
But then it
paragraph,
reveals itself again. So
the paragraph that's a quotation from the Zohar about the additional souls that are Israel's on Shabbat is in a sense about a coupling. You know, it's not, at least the translation is not absolutely explicit. I couldn't say for the Hebrew necessarily, but it's right on the edge.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to understand that in a strictly erotic way, the same way you're not supposed to understand Shir HaShirim in a strictly erotic way.
Right.
But the words are, it's certainly implied.
Yeah. I think that's great, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I want us to keep going. So just to be totally explicit and clear, I brought in some halakha. This is Jewish law from Mishnah Torah. Finally. So this is from Maimonides. Ron, you can read it for us, but this is just to not to, just because I want to overstate that, like that partnering up, while it's the topic of what we're discussing so far, is not the ultimate destination for everyone, and that's acknowledged in our ancient texts and in our legal codes. Marriage is not for everyone. So go ahead if you want to read it.
When a person's soul desires, is this where we are?
Yeah, you got it.
To study Torah at all times, is obsessed with its study, as was Ben Azai, and clings to it throughout life without marrying, that person is not considered to have transgressed.
Right, so going back to what Alina said, true or who, right? If the you know, but that's what's so amazing. You may see yourself in Ben Azai. That's interesting. But there was this rabbi who basically was too busy studying for relationships, at least romantic, at least marriage. Said, you know, I am basically married to Torah. That is what my soul truly desires. But then the question is, Alina said, fruit or who? God's first commandment, be fruitful and multiply. How can you be in breach of that, right? And our own halakha says, well, actually, osek b'mitzvah, pator mina mitzvah. If one who is busy with mitzvot are exempt from fulfilling other mitzvot. So that's a halakhic concept to say that if you're so busy studying Torah that you can't fulfill fruit or who before multiply, that's actually okay because you're so busy with another worthwhile relationship that you're in the clear because that's a mitzvah.
As long as not everybody does it.
Right. Right. Takes a special, it takes a special.
Yeah.
Number two basics are dollar dar and via haftar, and that denies both.
Sure, right. If that was all if everybody was, we were only, hermits or just so engrossed in Torah study that that was all we did, obviously society would fall apart. That can't be all we do. But there are individual exemptions, right? That for some people, that is truly where they find their calling and their love, and that is legitimate in our ancient legal codes, which I think is really interesting. So that, like, again, we're now in this point of our text study, we're moving away from just the pairing up model of love to exploring, the other, right, other manifestations of love that are not only like accepted or tolerated, but actually halakhically, not just kosher, but equal and welcome and embraced and wonderful. Yeah.
This is one point of view. Was there pushback to this?
To this?
Yeah.
It's a great question. I assume yes, because otherwise there would have been no need to write it down. So I think just by virtue of it existing, you would ask yourself, because that's the pushback, kru or vu. And there are so many commandments you cannot fulfill that have to do with marriage and family if you don't opt into that. Or if you're not able to, then, well, if you're not able to, it doesn't matter. But if you choose not to, that's the question.
Yeah.
And here it's saying it's actually okay to choose not to, if you are osek the mitzvah, if you're busy with
It's a
mitzvah.
strange explanation here. מתיירא מלישא אישה כדי שלא יטרח במזונות בעבור אשתו. He does not marry because he doesn't want to provide for her.
Oh,
I don't like that explanation.
Right. I think maybe it's because if all you're doing is.
I mean, it's fine, but not because you don't want to provide to the wife
Right.
you're married.
My assumption here is because, just like with certain Haredi circles, the idea is I don't have time for a job. I want to study all the time. So if you're not making money, I think that's what it's saying, maybe, that I can't provide for another person because I'm not making enough money to do that. I'm studying.
that's why the
Maybe, but
women.
sorry.
So
That's
we
why the
create
women
equality.
always work in the Orthodox, this ultra Orthodox.
But isn't that,
Because the men are busy studying all the time.
isn't that also
They all had jobs. All the rabbis in the Talmud.
Yes.
exactly? It's about to go. Thank you.
Rabbi Gail Leibovitz had a sukkah she'd always invite us to, there's rabbinical students in sukkah. And one of the panels was all of our Talmudic
Mhm.
rabbis and what job they had. Cobbler, blacksmith. Yeah,
Show it a little bit in Israel.
I know, I'm with you.
Right.
So
Rashi, who cited all the time, was a vendor, and
Still.
Maimonides was a physician.
Right. I know. Maimonides worked himself to the bone. Very much like Asad. Maimonides would be like, just up all night saving lives, and it was, yeah, go ahead.
The way that I look at it is I think that studying Torah is a different way to provide. I think that it provides for a lot more people. Because like all of the different like commentaries that we have on Torah, like those come from people who are close to being married to
Right.
Torah. Like that's what they do. And that is to the benefit of like our people as a whole.
Right, so very close to the Haredi argument, which is we are ensuring God's protection of us, like by fulfilling this, but by trust that we like have this spiritual shield around Am Yisrael. So you are indebted to us. You should be paying for our living because we are protecting you. But you're saying something a little bit different, which is it's the contributions that are made through the commentary and deepening our relationship to Torah, and that is certainly a service that is out. So I totally agree with that. Okay, but you asked about pushback, right? So while this is an exemption to not get married, it is not permission to be a recluse, which is different, right? Like in Judaism, even if it is okay with you don't have to get married, it is not okay with being an idol, right? It is not okay. We're not really a what's the word besides hermit?
Monk.
An aesthetic.
Monk, aesthetic, thank you. We're not really an aesthetic, we're an aesthetic. Very aesthetic, you're art. We're not aesthetic. But we're not very much an ascetic, there are some strains within Judaism that are, but it's not the mainstream by any means. It's very marginal, right? So I want to get into that.
When you study, you're supposed to have a partner.
Right, Kavrta, right? Study is best when it's in relationship, which is a perfect segue, thank you, into this. So going back to Bereshit, right, we're really jumping off from Genesis and everything we're doing today. Vayomer Hashem Elohim lo tov heyot hadam levado eshelo ezer kenegdo. God said it is not good for human beings to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart. Thank you guys.
My apologies, I have an appliance delivery.
No worries. Thank you always. Anytime you got. It's great. Yeah,
I wanted to make a comment to the last comment.
sure.
Last comment was when you study, it's good to have a partner. But the whole concept of machitza is to separate you from that part.
Is this a critique of the pizza?
It's a critique of the machitza.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, yeah, I'm very much with you. Yeah. So the other thing that there are so many things. Right. So I just want to make one point about Mechitza, which is, you know how we do the Debbie Friedman Mishabera? There's whole generations that say, well, that is, what do you mean? That was written in when was that written? 80s, 90s?
Yeah, recently.
Right. But there are Jews who think, that's from the 1400s, right? Like that's always, or like a Dola. Like there are melodies that were composed fairly recently that have
yesterday.
taken on the air of being, well, this is because it's how it's always been done, right? And so Mechitza is that, where it actually is not as ancient and halachic as it is branded as. Like if you look at ancient ruins of temples in Israel, and there's no evidence that there were ever any separation by
But the women come. I mean, when,
Come in the first place, you needed separation.
yeah.
Sure, you can make that argument. Then we'd have to rehash we'd have to actually present the archaeological evidence. But you're right, that's a good point, that maybe they would still come. I mean,
Later.
women were always.
They did come in family.
Right, in the gallery, yeah.
Right. But still, I have somewhere in my head, and again, I didn't bring it, so it's hard to really dive into it, but basically that it is not an ancient way we've always done things. And the reason for it is male centric, where it's, men will be tempted by women. It's also heteronormative, right? Men will be tempted by women, and that will distract them in prayer, and that's a big no-no, right? If you're
Is it,
distracted.
could the separation be because?
People.
Women are exempt?
Right, you're saying justifying sort of.
Yeah,
male
justify,
centric
well, we gotta keep the exempt people separate from the ones that are commanded,
Right, but you
as
could,
opposed to men and women.
yeah,
If
but just,
exempted,
right.
they're not exempted.
exactly, but then I get to this whole thing, just because women are exempt from time-bound mitzvot.
They're still allowed to do
It doesn't mean, you can opt into the chiyuv, it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to, so that doesn't hold water for me, but it's a good point, and I understand that.
Well, we women have our answer, of course. When the men sit together, they discuss business
Yeah.
or sports. It's true, when the women sit together, they may discuss fashion. Except the Haredim. The Haredot, they can't come, they're kids, they have too many kids floating around.
Right, so there are
Paying
more
attention.
traditional circles where that may be the culture.
It could be
but-
that, it could be actually that the women would be so busy thinking of the meals that they would be distracted. That's why they would be distracting. Because they wouldn't be paying full attention.
Sure, but it just by nature is such a flawed system.
Yeah.
Because first of all, it doesn't account for homosexual. The fact of like, well, what if, a man can be on the man's side, but the man might be distracted, or the woman may be on the woman's side, but the woman is distracted. That's one issue where that breaks down, but of course, anyway, but also just like, yeah. But the biggest gripe I have is that it is branded as being something that's always been done, and but it is not actually how it needs to be, or is not so enshrined philosophically as it's sort of being presented.
How
So-
old is it roughly?
No, it's a great question. I'm gonna look it up because I don't have the exact.
Teapots like that too.
Right.
It's fairly recent.
Okay, I want to get back to that, but I want us to we have 5 minutes for our last text. So I want to get back to the notion that it is not good for a human being to be alone. which is the importance of relationship and love through relationship in whatever manifestation that takes, whether it's romantic, marital, friendship, community. But that when you look, now we're going back to the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Rabbi Sachs is going to compare the two and say how Genesis 1 presents a couple things to note. I just want to give by way of context. One is that God is known by a different name than in Genesis 2. So at one point he's going to make the claim that in Genesis 2, we get the tetragrammaton, right? Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. That comes in Genesis 2, but not Genesis 1, which is just Elohim. But in Genesis 2, it's Hashem Elohim, right? Adonai Elohim. So we're getting God's fuller name in Genesis 2. And he asks, well, what is the reason that's the case? And he says it's because God is revealed through relationship, and Genesis 2 is about relationship. Genesis 1 is about systems. So God creates in Genesis 1, but there's not so much by way of relationship. But in Genesis 2, there's a lot more emphasis on relationship. For instance, here's another example. In Genesis 1, Adam calls Eve Isha, because Isha coming from Ish, right? Woman coming from man. God separated parts or took a rib, however you interpret that. But in Genesis 2, Adam gives Eve a name, Chava, because she's Em Kol Chai, mother of all living. So in Genesis 1, Eve is woman. Adam is giving a name for a group of people, but not having a relationship with the individual. Whereas in chapter 2, she is given an actual name, Chava, and there is a relationship between Adam and Eve in that way. But there's actually an acknowledgement of the ways in which these are individuals and building relationship from there. Anyway, I'll let Rabbi Sachs say the rest, but that's some context to where he's going on from here. So who wants to read? Maybe Francis, do you want to read first? You were excited.
Do I have a choice? Only after the man has given his wife a proper name do we find the Torah referring to God himself by his proper name alone, namely Hashem.
Right, that's the Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Until then, he has been described as either Elohim or Hashem Elohim, Elohim being the impersonal aspect of God. God is law, God is power, God is justice. In other words, our relationship to God parallels our relationship to one another. Only when we respect and recognize the uniqueness of another person are we capable of respecting and recognizing the uniqueness of God himself. In Genesis 1, God creates things, chemical elements, stars, planets, life forms, biological species. In Genesis 2:3, he creates people. In the first chapter, he creates systems. In the second chapter, he creates relationships. It is fundamental to the Torah's view of reality that these things belong to different worlds, distinct narratives, separate stories, alternative ways of seeing reality. Then comes the extraordinarily poignant verse, the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." God feels for the existential isolation of the first man. There was no such moment in the previous chapter. There, God simply creates. Here, God empathizes. He enters into the human mind. He feels what we feel. There is no such moment in any other ancient religious literature. What is radical about biblical monotheism is not just that there is only one God, not just that he is the source of all that exists, but that God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. God knew the loneliness of the first man before the first man knew it of himself. That is why the second creation account is telling us creation of things is relatively easy. Creation of relationships is hard.
So pause, I just want us to see all the connections to our first text, right? Number one being, remember we were talking about Matrona and sort of the Roman difference between, well, what is it? So here we're seeing how Judaism is standing apart. Biblical monotheism saying that it's not just that there is one God, but that God has this intimate relationship with us. It's not just that we're here to entertain or to sacrifice to the God, but that there's this relationship that is what's so radical. And then the other point at the end here, when she said, oh, it's easy, right? I can do this. I can do what God does, right? I can do, but saying here, well, creation of things is relatively easy, but creation of relationships is hard. That was the major point of the first text, right? A question, then I want us to finish the reading it.
That's 2 points. One is, it says that man should not be alone. It doesn't say that it doesn't say that he shouldn't, it doesn't say that he should have a sex partner. It says he shouldn't be the only man.
Correct. That's exactly my point. That as long as you're in a relationship, it doesn't matter what that necessarily looks like, as long as you're in a sacred
The second
relationship.
point is
Friends, community.
So then actually that could be
God
a
knew the
thing for
loneliness before man did.
gay
Of
marriage.
course, man didn't know about the loneliness. He hadn't eaten from the tree of knowledge yet. But he didn't know what loneliness was.
Sure, good. Right, like being naked but not knowing it yet.
Yeah, he
Good,
didn't know yet.
good. I want to be respectful of time because we're getting to it, so, or we're just past it. But can somebody take us home? Somebody take us home? Last couple paragraphs? Or the three paragraphs?
All right, I will.
Okay.
Taking everybody home. The Torah is telling us something very powerful.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. We have to create relationships before we encounter the God of relationship. We have to make space for the otherness of the human other to be able to make space for the otherness of the divine other. We have to give love before we can receive love. The Torah is telling us something very powerful. Never think of people as things. Never think of people as types. They are individuals. Never be content with creating systems. Care also about relationships. I believe that relationships are where our humanity is born and grows, flowers and flourishes. It is by loving people that we learn to love God and feel the fullness of his love for us. That's wonderfully powerful. Right, so.
Yeah, I usually like to end with my own enduring understanding, but he sums it up so beautifully. So I just want to give us that charge that in times that are filled with hate and loneliness and darkness, to respond to that with relationship, to do what you're doing, to come to lunch and learn, to come to opportunities for us to be together as a community and feel the love that can only be nurtured through relationship, and through that love, grow closer to God, who can only be understood through human relationships, through the power of relationship, to understand God of relationship. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Yes,
Good. Sorry on Zoom, I forgot to scroll down. I'm gonna leave this here.
Says.
What was that, Eric?
You know.
Selecting the place. Yeah. Yes.
Fair. I'm gonna let you, because this is petty, so I'm gonna leave this up, and I feel badly I wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't really cool.
Rabbi asked me a question.
Yeah, sure.
It's ASA.
No. Were you asking me a question?
Oh, no, Eric, I thought you were asking me a question. I feel
No.
bad.
Trying to do two things at the same time. There's an AJC briefing that's starting now. I'm trying to do two things at the same time.
What was that?
And that's
There's- There's an AJC briefing starting right now, so I'm trying to multitask. Sorry
Okay,
about
let me
that.
log out then. I'm gonna log out. Thank you.